They had warned us about Earth. The scholars called it an anomaly, the strategists labeled it an outlier, and the conquerors, the ones who had tried before, left it off their maps entirely. To us, it was an unclaimed primitive world on the fringes of the galactic core. Its people were scattered, its technology unimpressive. There was no empire, no great banners stretching across the stars. Just one small, stubborn species clinging to their homeworld. We thought we understood power. Then we met humanity. It began with a single incursion, a standard operation. Our fleets moved in with precision, deploying vessels designed to overwhelm any resistance before it could form. We had done this countless times before, subjugating lesser worlds, assimilating their knowledge, bending them to the will of the Dominion. But something was different this time. The humans didn't break. They didn't surrender. They didn't even hesitate. Before our ships had fully entered their system, the first wave was gone, erased in a blinding flash that left nothing but silence. At first, we thought it was a weapon, some hidden planetary defense we had overlooked. But as the second wave fell, and then the third, we began to realize the truth. This wasn't strategy. This wasn't luck. This was them. Their ships weren't built like ours. Ours were sleek, efficient, optimized for battle. Theirs were brutal, reinforced beyond reason, engines that burned hotter than logic dictated. They weren't just warships. They were declarations. Warnings wrapped in steel. And worse, they adapted. Every skirmish, every engagement, they learned. What worked against them once never worked again. We had encountered intelligent species before, beings who could analyze, react, evolve. But humanity did it at a speed that defied explanation. Their machines shifted tactics mid-battle. Their soldiers moved with an understanding of warfare that felt less like strategy and more like instinct. They weren't fighting for dominance or conquest. They were fighting because they had to. Because, to them, war was not an event. It was history. It was survival. It was written into their very existence. Still, we refused to acknowledge what we were seeing. Even as our commanders hesitated, even as our fleet numbers dwindled, we told ourselves it was a temporary resistance. That we would break them eventually. Then we saw it, the thing that made us understand. It wasn't a weapon, not in the traditional sense. It wasn't some superstructure or forbidden technology. It was a single, battered vessel. Human-built, scorched from battle, its engines flickering with the last embers of failing power. But it didn't retreat. It didn't surrender. It tore through our blockade at speeds that should have torn it apart, weaving between our fire like it saw the future itself. Every calculation we ran said it shouldn't have made it. Every probability chart said it should have failed. And yet, it pressed on. One ship. One crew. Defying an empire. At that moment, we understood. Power wasn't numbers. It wasn't weapons. It wasn't the might of a fleet stretching from one end of the galaxy to the other. Power was the refusal to fall. The will to endure. And in that, humanity was unstoppable. The battered human vessel cut through the darkness, weaving through the wreckage of a battle that should have ended hours ago. It was small, insignificant by galactic standards, a relic compared to our warships. And yet, it had done the impossible, pierced our blockade, shattered our formations, and now it was vanishing beyond the range of our pursuit. We had thrown everything at it, weapons that could rip through dreadnoughts, predictive targeting systems that had never missed. But none of it had mattered. They had survived. The command bridge was silent. Not the quiet of discipline, but the hollow, stunned silence of something deeply, fundamentally wrong. The high strategist stood at the edge of the holomap, watching as the human ship signal faded from our scanners. His claws twitched at his sides, a subtle tremor betraying the thoughts he dared not voice. We had seen resistance before. We had fought desperate species clinging to their doomed worlds. But never this. Never a species that could turn sheer audacity into a weapon. Never a species that defied fate itself. Then came the report that shattered what little confidence remained. One of our listening stations, positioned deep within the void, had intercepted human transmissions coded, scrambled beyond recognition. But our analysts had isolated something, a phrase repeated over and over. A name. Tarkansky. We didn't know what it meant. A ship? A commander? A warning? But we knew one thing: this wasn't over. Across the Dominion, whispers spread like wildfire. The humans had survived longer than projected. They had resisted longer than entire empires before them. And then came something worse than defiance. They had countered. Fleets once thought unstoppable were being ambushed. Supply lines vanished overnight. Entire sectors fell into confusion. The humans weren't just fighting, they were winning battles they had no right to win. Desperation took root. If our greatest fleets couldn't break them, then what would? The answer came from the Dominion's inner council. A single message delivered to every ruling body across the known galaxy. It is time. At first, none of us understood. Then the truth set in. The Dominion had prepared for this contingency. It had been arrogant but not blind. Humanity had been studied, dissected, theorized about in secret for centuries. And somewhere, buried deep beneath layers of deception, the Council had devised an answer. A failsafe. We would not fight the humans any longer. We would take from them the thing that made them unstoppable. Even now, as the remnants of our forces scrambled to recover, as the name Tarkansky echoed in our transmission logs like a ghost, the first phase was already in motion. The deception had begun. Humanity, for all its strength, for all its resilience, had one fatal weakness. They trusted, and we were about to betray them in ways they had never seen before. Deep within the command chamber of the UHS Dauntless, Admiral Elias Varick watched the battle reports stream in, his jaw tightening with each new entry. The Dominion wasn't retreating. It was shifting. The relentless brute force assaults had slowed, replaced with something colder, more calculated. Supply routes that should have been secure were now compromised. Critical outposts went dark without a trace of enemy presence. And now, Tarkansky's name, one that only a handful of high-ranking officers even knew, had surfaced in intercepted Dominion transmissions. Someone, somewhere, had told them. Varick turned to his officers, their faces grim under the dim glow of the holograms. "We have a leak," he said, voice steady despite the weight of the words. "And we're running out of time to find it." On the other side of the war, High Strategist Reth Vakul stood before the Dominion Council, his slit-pupiled eyes narrowing as the Chancellor delivered the final verdict. "The humans are adaptable," the Chancellor rasped, his voice a low rumble of age and authority. "But they are not invincible. We will give them what they crave. A lifeline. A desperate chance for peace. And when they reach for it, we will break them." Reth Vakul had doubts. He had fought the humans firsthand, had seen what raw defiance looked like. He had witnessed their ships moving like living things, outmaneuvering his best fleets. He had studied their history, how they had clawed their way up from war and ruin, never once accepting defeat. Could they really be deceived so easily? But the Dominion had already put the plan into motion. A captured transmission, carefully placed, led humanity to believe that a schism was forming within the Dominion's upper ranks. That a faction, wary of war, was willing to defect. A high-ranking official, a supposed traitor, had been placed at the heart of it, an invitation sent to humanity's most desperate leaders. It was bait wrapped in hope. Back on Earth, the United Human Front gathered in a secret war room beneath the ruins of old Geneva. The war had forced humanity's fractured governments to unite. Military leaders clashed with politicians, survivalists argued with diplomats, and hidden factions, corporate powers, old world elites whispered of agendas beyond the war. General Lynn Calder slammed a fist onto the table. "It's a trap," she said. "The Dominion doesn't negotiate. This is a setup, and you all know it." Across from her, Chancellor Aidan Margrave leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "And if it isn't, if there's even a sliver of a chance that we can fracture them from within, we have to take it." Silence stretched, the weight of impossible choices pressing down on the room. In the end, it wasn't logic that decided. It was desperation. 2 days later, a small human strike team, hand-picked, lethal, and sworn to secrecy, slipped through the warfront, heading toward the rendezvous point. Among them was Commander Elise Tarkansky, the woman the Dominion feared, the woman who was walking straight into their trap. The human strike team moved like shadows through the ruined corridors of the derelict station. It had once been a Dominion outpost, but now it was a ghost, a perfect stage for deception. Elise Tarkansky led the way, her pulse steady despite the feeling gnawing at the back of her mind. This was too easy. No automated defenses, no patrols. Just the eerie hum of life support barely holding on and the faint flickering glow of emergency lights. The Dominion wanted them here. That much was certain. The only question was why. In the distance, a single figure waited in the open, clad in the unmistakable deep blue robes of a high-ranking Dominion official. Tarkansky's team fanned out, weapons raised but fingers off the triggers. The so-called traitor counselor Vexnire stood motionless, his expression unreadable through the faint shimmer of his species' bioluminescent skin. "You are more cautious than expected," he said, his voice carrying through the emptiness. "That is good. But not enough." The trap triggered before Tarkansky could respond. Power surged through the station, and suddenly the entire structure shifted. Hull reinforcements slammed into place. Gravity distortions rippled through the air, and deep within the corridors, the sound of advancing troops echoed. Dominion forces, waiting for them to step too far in. Tarkansky barely had time to register the betrayal before the first shots rang out. Back on Earth, the War Council received the distress signal. Scrambled, distorted, but the message was clear: the strike team was compromised. Margrave clenched his jaw, already seeing the consequences unfold. A rescue mission was impossible. Any ship sent now would be obliterated. And worse, this confirmed the worst-case scenario. The Dominion wasn't just toying with them. It was moving to end them. A new fleet had been detected emerging from deep space, an armada unlike anything previously seen. Not just warships, but planetary siege platforms, the kind designed to break a civilization in a single decisive campaign. The Dominion wasn't interested in occupation anymore. This was extermination. Lynn Calder exhaled slowly, looking at the holographic projection of the incoming fleet. "We don't have enough firepower to stop that." Margrave nodded. Not directly. That was the moment the real plan fell into place. Not a counterattack, not a last stand, but something entirely different. Humanity had spent the war surviving, adapting. But now, for the first time, they would set the terms. The Dominion's greatest weakness wasn't their technology or tactics. It was their certainty, their inability to conceive that a lesser species might not play by their rules. Deep beneath Mars, in a classified installation that only a handful knew existed, a project that had been buried for decades was being activated. Something ancient. Something unfinished. Tarkansky's team was lost. The Dominion fleet was coming. And humanity had one move left. Not to fight. Not to surrender. To rewrite the war itself. The deep space installation beneath Mars came alive with an eerie hum, its dormant systems flickering on for the first time in centuries. A project long buried, hidden even from most of humanity's own leadership, was now their only chance. Engineers scrambled through the control rooms, inputting override codes, bypassing ancient security systems that had been designed for a war no one even remembered. The displays flickered, revealing blueprints that shouldn't have existed, ships built for something far greater than any battle humanity had ever fought. It wasn't just a superweapon. It was an ark, a remnant of a civilization that had once reached beyond the stars and then vanished without a trace. Then the alarms started blaring. A breach. Margrave rushed to the central control deck, expecting to hear that Dominion saboteurs had infiltrated the facility. Instead, what he saw chilled him more than any enemy fleet ever could. The system had been accessed remotely. From deep space. Something else was out there. Something human. A signal pulsed through the void, originating from a sector that hadn't been visited in thousands of years. It was old, encoded in long-dead languages, but the meaning was unmistakable. A recall order. Not a warning, not a distress call. A command. Lynn Calder's voice was tight with disbelief as she read the data streams pouring in. "Sir, this isn't just a hidden fleet. This is a lost empire." The Dominion fleet was still advancing, their numbers overwhelming. But now, the board had changed. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival against an external threat anymore. The ghosts of their own past had just returned. And they weren't answering to anyone in the current regime. Then the impossible happened. The Martian facility systems shut down. The ancient warships, their cores humming to life, suddenly froze mid-activation. Whatever was out there in deep space had seized control. Margrave clenched his fists, watching as their last hope slipped from their grasp. They had spent the war believing they were alone, fighting an enemy that outmatched them in every way, except for human ingenuity. But now the question was no longer whether they could outthink the Dominion. It was whether they could survive their own forgotten past. The Martian facility remained dark, its ancient warships locked in place, lifeless despite the power thrumming through their cores. Margrave's team worked frantically, running override sequences, but the truth was clear: the system wasn't in their hands anymore. Every terminal flickered with the same cryptic message, "Recall in progress." Then the outer sensors flared, warning of an incoming mass, something moving fast from deep space. The lost fleet had returned. It wasn't Dominion. The signatures were human. A formation of massive, angular ships emerged from the void, their hulls bearing no known insignia. These vessels were old, predating any recorded human designs, but they moved with purpose, taking position between the Dominion armada and the crumbling Martian defense line. They were advanced, their weapons silent but poised, and for the first time since the war began, the Dominion hesitated. A single transmission cut through every frequency, a voice calm and absolute. "Stand down. The Dominion will not claim this world." Margrave didn't know whether to feel hope or dread. This was no reinforcement fleet. This was something humanity had lost, something older than any of them. The recall order hadn't been for their forces, it had been for them. The Dominion, ever calculating, launched their assault, sending their forward divisions toward the Martian line. Plasma lances and kinetic shells cut through the void. The ancient fleet responded. They didn't fire conventional weapons. They used something else, something human, but beyond anything modern Earth had developed. Their ships moved in impossible ways, bending physics, tearing through Dominion formations with bursts of energy that folded space itself. Entire enemy vessels vanished, erased as if they had never been there. For the first time in recorded history, the Dominion forces broke. Yet as the battle raged, Margrave realized the truth. These ancient humans weren't here to save them. They had their own agenda, their own war. The recall order was absolute. Humanity as it existed now fractured, desperate. Something unrefined, something unfinished. The lead vessel of the lost fleet turned toward Mars. It wasn't just here to protect. It was here to reclaim. Lynn's voice came through over the command link, urgent and strained. "Sir, they're overriding everything. The defense grid, the comm networks, even our ships. They're taking full control." Margrave looked at the Dominion fleet, still burning, still falling back. They had fought this war believing the enemy was out there, something to be defeated with sheer will and innovation. But now, standing at the precipice of victory, they saw the real battle was only beginning. Because the greatest threat to humanity's future might not have been the Dominion at all. It might have been their own past coming back to take what it believed was rightfully theirs. The lost fleet had won. The Dominion's forces were in full retreat, their vast armadas shattered, their war engines burning in the void. But there was no celebration, no cries of victory. Only silence. Margrave stood on the bridge, staring at the impossible sight before him. The ancient ships, unmistakably human, now held the skies. Their weapons were quiet, but their presence was a message in itself. They had come back not as saviors, but as rulers. A transmission cut through the comms, clearer now, carrying weight beyond its words. "You have strayed too far. Your war has threatened the balance. We reclaim stewardship of our own." Lynn's voice broke through, barely above a whisper. "They think we're unworthy." Margrave clenched his fists. They had built from nothing, clawed their way to survival, defied a galactic empire that had never known defeat, only to be told they weren't ready. That they needed to be guided. Another wave of energy pulsed through the system, disabling what remained of their fleets. The ancient humans weren't just taking control of Mars, they were taking control of everything. For a long moment, there was no sound. No orders. No resistance. Just the quiet weight of inevitability. Then Margrave exhaled, shaking his head. No. He turned to his officers, to his soldiers, to the people who had fought and bled to keep humanity free. His voice was steady when he spoke. "We don't surrender. Not now. Not ever." Lin met his gaze, and for a second, hesitation flickered in her eyes. The weight of history, the fear of fighting something so far beyond them. But then she nodded. One by one, the others did too. They were human. They didn't kneel. The first strike was subtle Lin rerouting control of the orbital defense grid, barely noticeable through the vast data streams of the Lost Fleet systems. Then, another. Sabotage hidden within compliance. A virus buried in a handshake. They had spent the entire war fighting an enemy who outgunned them at every turn, and they had survived by being smarter. The ancient fleet had the power of forgotten civilizations. But this humanity, this stubborn, reckless, brilliant humanity, had something else. Ingenuity. Adaptability. Defiance. The system flared to life again, not under the control of the ancients, but under the hands of those who had earned it. The Lost Fleet hesitated, their perfect order fracturing, confused by the resistance of a species they had long dismissed. It was enough. Margrave knew they couldn't win in a direct battle. Not today. Maybe not for years. But this wasn't about victory. It was about choice. About proving they were not children, not subjects, not remnants of a forgotten past. They were humanity, and they would decide their own future. As Mars burned behind them and the Lost Fleet reeled, Margrave gave the final order. We go dark. We go silent. And then we show them what humanity does best. They vanished into the void, leaving only the promise of what was to come.